to do that today. I want to try to focus on the AI side and how we deploy some of the artificial intelligence technologies that we've been discussing in the field. So, okay, next slide. This slide actually dates back from 2001, so almost 25 years ago. A study that NASA did on robotics generally, a lot of it focused on things like mobility. But one of the questions we looked at was how to automate exploration and how to enable robots to do science out in the field. So that chart on the bottom right there is things like being able to follow plans and collect data, all the way up to having a discovery plan and generating hypotheses on the fly. And that stuff towards the end, 25 years ago, we thought in 10 years we'll get there. So there you go. That's kind of the story of robotics, and that's why you don't have a robot cleaning your house and doing your dishes for you. So one of the things that came out of this, though, was a little bit of organization of how we could get to autonomy for science. And here, a chart that I've used for a while, and I used to always be talking on the left side of this chart where we were trying to come up with methods of, interpreting some data and maybe detecting observation or anomalies in the data, trying to make some sense of that data, to where we are now, where we're doing more complex things like having the navigation and the actions of the robot actually guided by some type of scientific hypothesis, making decisions about where to sample in order to gain information to confirm or refute the hypothesis, building maps of greater and greater accuracy by making decisions on the fly. So we're moving towards the right here in trying to embody in-situ robots with this type of artificial intelligence. So why do this? I hope I'm preaching to the choir here that most people would agree that we need this kind of autonomy. I already heard mention of Titan just a minute or so ago, but as the mission durations get longer and the cost for operations, the cost for having all those people sitting in a room, processing data, watching results go up, we need greater and greater capability on the robots. Problems like being able to place instruments accurately and calibrate, make sure you're getting good measurements, verifying those observations, these things, if we can do them on board, save a lot of time and effort. Operations that are more complicated, like drilling or some of the sample processing that we've heard about, these things, again, we'd like to have that happen automatically. And all this kind of is driven by the available communication bandwidth and data volume, and sometimes those long delays. All these things, again, push us towards greater and greater autonomy. So we're trying to create these systems then that can do science data collection, not just drive around, not just take pictures, but actually do data collection for science. So, where we are today is we're able to make these systems highly productive in the sense that they can generate more data than we can ever get back to Earth, take more pictures, and run more instrument experiments and maybe cache more samples than we can get through the available communication bandwidth and delays that I mentioned. But what's still difficult is deciding what of that data to actually transmit. I was in a NASA mission review recently where there was a lot of concern about the fact that a lot of the bandwidth was going to be spent sending file listings and thumbnails of data rather than sending the actual data. And couldn't we get more of that to happen in situ rather than having to send all this summary information? It's also really difficult to verify that the data that's been collected is correct. Are your exposures right? Are your settings correct? Are you getting the best signal to noise ratio possible? So those are the kinds of things that are still quite difficult to do on board. So it used to be when I talked to planetary scientists, there was always the concern, your robot's going to put me out of a job. And my response to that has been, that our goal is to produce more and better information. And having that better information is going to make the science easier, maybe more compelling, more obvious, but still we're going to require humans to interpret that data. I mean, there's no point to collecting it if there's not someone at the end to look at it. So our goal in deploying these types of systems into the field is, again, to get more data, meaning maximizing the amount of useful, relevant data we can collect. And then from that, minimizing the amount of irrelevant information. So getting rid of data that we don't need, things that aren't exposed properly, things that are redundant with other information. So more and better is the goal, making robots a better tool for scientists. So in situ science, I guess that was the purview for today. Most of you have probably walked around in the field and done that, where you have this combination of your knowledge and the neural network in your head that's been carefully trained, making observations, and you're trying to produce some interpretation of that, maybe a map. Maps are one of the things that we think about a lot because robots need maps for a number of different reasons. So as you wander in the field, you have this idea of what you're looking at and how things are laying out, and maybe you start to, take measurements or decide where you're going to look based on that hypothesis. So we've tried to, in many of these systems for in situ science, encode this in a way. This is getting a little bit towards my own work, but I think generally speaking, the work of folks doing robot explorers, our next generation of explorers need to understand something of what they're looking for, what their purpose is. So they're not purely automated in the sense of blindly performing a sequence of actions. They're autonomous in that they're making decisions about those, about what they can do, and there's going to be some reasoning required for that. So our motivation then is for these robots to assist scientists and communicate through some framework. And Bayesian frameworks, who we've talked about already today, are part of that structure. So you can think of it like, a human scientist has some initial hypothesis. Maybe it's in the form of a map, maybe it's in the form of a question or a signal. But you start with that hypothesis, and then you want to make measurements in situ that are going to confirm or refute the hypothesis. So we can do this in the form of a Bayesian model. This is an example from geology where we have some initial, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but on the left there, an initial set of hypotheses about the geology of a region. On the right, we have a measurement that we can take, so we can collect a spectra. And in between those two, there's some interpretation that has to happen. So we need to get from spectra to minerals to maybe geologic classes that will then start to line up with the model that we're trying to explore. So in this system, then we have the scientist and we have the robot, and we'd like to create sort of a virtuous cycle where the scientist has some initial model. From that model, we can generate plans so that we can automatically determine where we need to take observations. And then once we've collected those observations, we can interpret them back into the model and update, and probably run this cycle a number of times before communicating back to a scientist, or very much have the person in the loop, and that gets driven mostly by available bandwidth. So let's see. Looks like the videos don't really play through this interface, but what I wanted to show here is just a couple, maybe a deeper look into the two parts of this process then. First being the Bayesian inference, where you go from observations to a model. So we can use something like a variational autoencoder to take data and turn that into measurements or interpretations of that data that then we can put into a probabilistic model. We can reconstruct from that model what measurements we expect to get in other places. Again, sorry, this works a little better with a video playing, but I don't know how to make that work. Let me jump forward here then. So once we have taken measurements and we've extracted features and then projected what the measurements will be throughout the area that we're mapping, we can then take that map, in this case, inferred spectra over region, and assign mineral classifications. Oh, now we have a video that's working. If folks can see that. So what's interesting here is the second part of the process. Once we have that model, we can start to make decisions about where to make measurements to best reduce the uncertainty in the model. So I think this is one of the interesting takeaways from that I wanted to convey to folks, that if we are able to interpret data and also understand how accurately we're interpreting that data. So we have a measure of uncertainty. In this case, we're calling that entropy. Then we can estimate where a measurement will best reduce the uncertainty in the model. And what you're seeing in the bottom right there is a pathway of a robot exploring through a region. Initially, there's a lot of uncertainty, the yellowish color. And as we take additional measurements, the uncertainty is reduced. And what's important to observe is that we're only sampling at those locations where there are white dots appearing, but the uncertainty is being reduced over the entire area because of the underlying Bayesian model that we've constructed. Just a couple of other thoughts here. It's not enough to just maximize your information. You have to reason about a lot of things at once. So that makes this problem a lot more complicated. Here's an example of a robot that's exploring, starting in the upper right. Not only is it trying to maximize the information gain, that's the entropy there, but it's also trying to avoid shadows. It's trying to avoid steep slopes. So we have to reason about all of these things at once. And this is what's happening in robotics today. This kind of multi-objective optimization. The goal is then to be able to build a scientific model that maps to that hypothesis. In this case, we're seeing an experiment that we did with data from Mars, mapping out the geology of a site. Again, trying to find the most effective path to build that model. I think I'm going to skip over the next few things. A lot of this is based on using variational autoencoders to interpret the signal, but I wanted to show, okay, so here the idea being that as you take more measurements, the uncertainty and the reconstructed spectra becomes more accurate throughout the entire model, not just the places where you take measurements. But where is that? Deep generative models, I think we talked about before, the idea that everything gets encoded in in a Gaussian process or other process model. But the point I wanted to get to is that was brought up before. Some of these things are not easily interpretable. Like here on the slide, I'm showing feature 1, feature 2, feature 3. I don't know what they are. I mean, I can look at that aerial image on the far left and say, okay, somehow it relates to the spectral structure, but I don't really know what these features are. So we're actually now working on methods. One of them is called the deep conditional Gaussian model, where you estimate not only the output of the model, but also the underlying uncertainty. So you're estimating the covariances of all the different input variables, and then you can see, in this example here, I'm showing we have an input that's a multispectral data from the Aster satellite, and we're trying to reconstruct a continuous spectra like you might get from AVERIS, and also estimate the covariances between all the internal parameters so that we can say what part of the spectra is leading to our interpretation. So, when you look at the picture, what part of the image helps you decide it's a dog, not a cat? So that's new and recent work, again, enabling these in situ systems to do a lot more interpretation on the fly so that they can make decisions about what data to collect next, but also what data to send back to scientists. I'm going to jump over all my slides here because I'm sure I'm running low on time. And again, the point here of this in situ science is to collect more and better information, to keep a human in the loop, so that they can add to that information, add new hypotheses, or look at what the robot's model is looking like, deciding what parts of the model are being applied and maybe what's right and what's wrong. All right, so that's a quick look at current in situ science stuff, and I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.